listener production.
Hey, Bension Siebert here with you for the briefing. Last week, Elon Musk unveiled the latest version of a product with, let's call them, big ambitions, even for Elon.
Something that anyone could own. So you could have your own personal R2-D2 C-3PO. This would cost something like, $20,000, $30,000. The cost of products and services will decline dramatically, and basically anyone will be able to have any products and services they want. It will be an age of abundance.
Footage from Tesla's We Robot event in California has gone viral, showing Optimus robots serving drinks, dancing, handing out gifts, and even chatting with attendees.
Oh, hello, John.
How are you?
How you doing?
That's crazy. I'm talking to a robot. What's the hardest thing about being a robot?
Trying to learn how to be as human as you guys are.
Musk claimed that in the not-too-distant future, Optimus robots will be literally walking among us as sort of a domestic servant, capable of walking your dog, babysitting and teaching your kids, mowing the lawn and running errands. These robots are far from that right now, but Musk's companies have a history of making seemingly technically impossible things happen. Take, for instance, just in the past 24 hours, Musk's rocket company, SpaceX, for the first time in human history, managed to launch a rocket and then catch it again in the warm embrace of some big mechanical arms. So should we believe Elon's hype about Tesla's robots too? James Hennessy is a tech journalist and ideas editor at Capital Brief. James, welcome back to the briefing. What did you think of these Optimus robots?
It's interesting, sort of big picture, that so much of the tech world is sort of focusing on this idea of humanoid robots. I think there's been a big rush to sort of figure out what the next category of devices is after things like the smartphone and electric vehicles and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of companies that are sort of thinking about something that was, relatively sci-fi only a few years ago. But specifically when it comes to Tesla's Optimus, they've been talking about it for a few years at this point. But I think it's particularly intriguing at the moment. Tesla is facing a slowdown in the growth of the EV market, electric vehicles. They are repitching themselves sort of as a autonomy company. We build autonomous systems, whether it be cars that drive themselves or, a robot helper that lives in your home and does tasks for you and interacts with you and what have you. What we saw at the tail end of last week with the Tesla presentation, which they called We Robot, is something that is very clearly not ready for prime time. But it was kind of one of the biggest and I guess you could say boldest displays of humanoid robot technology that we've seen. It was presented in one way, but I think there was a little bit of trickery on there. But in some regards, still a really, really impressive piece of technology.
We'll talk a little bit about the trickery in a sec, but Elon Musk is making some huge claims for Optimus. He says that this is going to be the biggest product ever of any kind. It's going to be people's R2-D2. And somehow they're going to cause the cost of everything to plummet, and you can just have all the goods and services you want as a result of the existence of this robot. What do you think of those claims? Is that a plausible version of the future to you?
I mean, it's certainly a version of the future that seems more realistic than maybe it did a few years ago, but, there's a fair bit to get through before we get to that point. This entire presentation, from the self-driving cars to the robots, was light on detail, let's be honest, but he was talking about the entire reshaping of our cities around self-driving cars and then, the entire reshaping of our lives around these humanoid robots, which, he talks about as something that can perform tasks for you around the house, be a friend, and sort of a relatively, I guess you could say, dystopian vision of the future. But, it's also something that sci-fi writers have been thinking about for a while, that we could interact with robots in a social and professional way. But, as I kind of alluded to, what they showed and the capabilities that it has currently are not even really remotely close to that world. He's really sketching out a future of, at the very least, a decade away.
Yeah. So what was new about this from a technological standpoint? Because we have seen humanoid robots before.
What is kind of new and what is, I guess you could say, impressive about Optimus? Because you're right, we have seen humanoid robots. You think back to Asimo from Honda is the famous one that people were seeing 15, 20 years ago. You know, that sort of pearlescent white robot that was shuffling around on stages at their keynotes. What is sort of cutting edge about Optimus versus other offerings in this space? It is more mobile and what you would call articulated than robots we've seen in the past. So there's a lot of demonstration of what they can do with their hands, essentially. And this is kind of one of the key humps to get over and something that they keep repeatedly showing. At their last presentation where they were showing off Optimus capabilities, they showed it, you know, folding a T-shirt. It wasn't doing it with AI or totally unaided, but it was really just to demonstrate the fact that its fingers can move in a relatively human-like way. And that is a big problem that's difficult to get over. Obviously, with this presentation, they had the Optimus set up at the bar serving beers, and that requires, you know, the robot to be able to hold a glass, you know, without dropping or breaking it, and administer the beer tap.
Step right up.
Can I have a watermelon fogarita?
A watermelon?
Yeah.
How am I doing so far?
Killing it.
Thank you so much.
Essentially what they were talking about. They're not showing something that is completely able to operate autonomously and be a servant. They're just really operating the level of it can pick up a glass and put beer into it at a physical level without there being problems.
One of the things that has been a viral phenomenon, I guess you would say, over the past few days has been these interactions between people and these robots where it's sort of suggested that the robots are talking in real time to the people. Do we know whether these robots were speaking autonomously?
So this is where we get to sort of like the little bit of showmanship and trickery. And it's probably appropriate that the keynote was at the Warner Brothers studio in California. You know, there was a bit of movie magic going on there, I think.
Optimus can talk?
Yeah.
Hey, Optimus, what's up?
How's it going, man?
What do you think of the new Cybercab?
Cybercab looks amazing.
I know.
I'm trying to get a ride.
It's interesting because, as many people have probably seen, companies like OpenAI with ChatGPT and other companies in the AI space are showing some like relatively credible voice control technology where you can have something that resembles a human conversation with these sort of AI systems. That's happening. But in this case, and from the clips that have been shared and from some of the detail from people who were there at the presentation, it seems pretty unlikely that people were actually talking to an AI system. And when you listen to the audio of it, it sounds a little bit too human-like. What seems to be the case, and it's not 100% clear what they were doing, how they were executing it, but there was definitely some level of human assistance going on here, whether it be in the way the robots were moving and operating at certain times, or the conversations they were having. It seemed like, and this is just based on the reporting and what the video looks like, someone was operating the robot remotely and speaking through it to the people that were communicating with it. So it wasn't with an automated system, although obviously that's what they want to happen down the line.
From a strategic perspective, given the fact that there is a certain amount of clunkiness, a certain amount of like Emperor's not got any clothes vibe about this, why do you think Tesla is rolling it out now anyway?
So I think there's a few things going on. The big one is what I alluded to before, which is that the EV market has seen a slowdown in growth. It seemed for a little bit like electric vehicles were going to be absolutely everywhere and be the dominant mode of transportation. That hasn't actually happened. And parallel to that, Tesla is facing competition, both from traditional automakers and also like a rising tide of Chinese EV makers, which are releasing more affordable vehicles. Tesla still has pole position in that space, but they have some competitors sort of nipping at their heels. So they've started to really think of themselves as an autonomy company. You know, we are better than anyone else at developing this sort of marriage of hardware and software that lets you have these devices and vehicles and power systems and whatever that operate without human input. And it also comes down to the fact that I think, Elon Musk is a real sci-fi minded kind of guy. He loves the idea of being at the very cutting edge in all the companies that he's working with. And I think this is kind of like a dream in that space that, people have been talking for a century about the idea of having like a robot helper that interacts with you in sort of like a humanistic way. And wow, look, all the pieces are coming together in these disparate bits of technology that we can actually do that. But there's a lot of open questions as to like whether people will actually want it or what it will look like when it actually arrives in people's homes.
What do you think is the most plausible version of this kind of technology in, say, 10 years' time? Could we actually expect people in their own homes having these robots, or at hospitality venues kind of thing? Like, is that something that could potentially, from a technological perspective, happen? Or are there like hard problems with this kind of technology that mean that, unlike with the huge surge of development in AI over the past just couple of years, for example, this is a problem that necessarily is harder to solve from a tech perspective?
I think there's actually, this is sort of coming out of the realm of being a sci-fi promise. Whether it will be exactly what people have in their mind is one question. But I think it's quite plausible that if they can develop the hardware side of these humanoid robots and then feed it vast amounts of data of people performing certain tasks and be able to make that connection, we should be able to see some fairly credible autonomous systems. That doesn't preclude the fact that there are going to be substantial hard problems. The idea of releasing a robot onto the world that can do anything and you can tell it to do anything and it'll perform those tasks in a reasonable way is just a vastly bigger problem. So I think there's lots of progress in this space, but it's one of the hardest problems you can imagine doing, essentially.
Musk and Tesla called this event We Robot, and certainly Optimus and the Robo van look quite similar to the designs in that movie. First, is that just plagiarism? And secondly, in that movie, there is some murder of humans involving robots. Should we be worried?
Look, I don't know about the plagiarism question. Obviously, you see a lot of that in the current tech world, especially as this sort of AI moment is happening, that there is a lot of like very, very distinct and intentional references back to, this sort of aspirational era of sci-fi before things all got a bit grim and Blade Runner. In fact, during the presentation, Elon Musk specifically brought up screenshots from Blade Runner and said, I love this movie, but this doesn't have to be the future that we go towards.
I love Blade Runner, but not the bleak apocalypse. We want to have a fun, exciting future.
So there's a lot of that in the air in Silicon Valley and other sort of tech regions at the moment, whether some of it is just like, a lot of it definitely is hype over substance, but, that's the kind of way that they're thinking about these things. And you're right, yes, iRobot had, at least the film, had a darker sort of aspect to it. And these are some of the big questions, because on the one hand, Musk is talking about all this stuff, autonomous systems, stuff that, works itself without human input, is intelligent, quote unquote. But on the other hand, he has also been very, very upfront about being really worried about the negative effects of autonomous AI systems.
I think this will be the biggest product ever of any kind, provided we address risks of digital superintelligence. 80% probability of a good outcome. Look on the bright side.
He was one of the co-founders of OpenAI, and one of the reasons is that he has publicly said that he thinks AI could be, if not handled correctly, like an apocalyptic event for humanity. And a lot of people are sort of talking in those terms. Again, is some of this just marketing hype? When you're talking about a product and you say this is so incredible and powerful that it could end humanity, a little bit of that is talking your own books, right? The idea that I'm working on something that's so cool that it could have such a negative impact. So there are a lot of people thinking about these questions, but I think we're going to hear so much more about this in the coming years, especially as there are more and more self-driving vehicles on the road, especially as there are, potentially autonomous sort of systems like the Optimus robot, or one from, Apple working on things in the robotics and automation space. People start to wonder, what decisions should they be able to make? How should they be able to make those decisions? What happens if something goes wrong? What could go wrong? We're probably going to have plenty more of those conversations in the years to come.
Okay, well, I guess we'll see what happens, won't we? James Hennessy, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks for having me.
James Hennessy there. He's a tech journalist and ideas editor at Capital Brief. That's it for this episode of The Briefing. If there's someone in your life with an interest in this kind of tech, or in Elon Musk specifically, why not send them a link to this app? Meanwhile, if you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and on TikTok and YouTube, just search Listener Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed tomorrow from 6 a.m. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you next time.